Welcome back to the Around the Diamond podcast with your host, Sam Edwards, episode 185, the podcast for the baseball nerd. Thank you for joining me. Today, we've got a fantastic episode doing our top 10 third baseman list. We've also got some news to cover. And chief among these news is we've got a fantastic guest on today, guys. He is the host of the Keeper Cut podcast, Pete Ball. Pete, how are we doing?
I'm doing great, Sam. Thanks for having me on the show. Really excited to talk some third base, the worst position in fantasy this year.
It sucks. It really sucks. And, you're just looking for a list that has some good stars. And, you just can't, this list just doesn't give you much, I'd much prefer to do like second base,
Which is saying something because, man, second base is really not that great either. But yeah, no, we're thin here at third base. It's been this way for a while, and it's coming to a head this season.
Yeah. There's plenty of studs on this list, I will say, and plenty of tough decisions. So I'm really curious where we come in, especially in the lower part of the list and things like that. But we'll get to it. And I'd love to hear your thought process on making this list as well. But before we get to that, let's cover some of the latest news that is going around the league right now. Manny Machado, big name. Maybe he's on my list. Maybe he's not. Who knows? But he's in the news. Came out that he is planning on exercising his opt-out at the end of this season. He would be getting 5 years, $150 million. Obviously, he wants to opt out of that. He's going to be 31. How do you feel about this opt-out? The Padres offered him 5 years, $105 million on top of the 5 years, $150 that he would have gotten. After they just gave Xander the money that they did, is that he set a deadline, February 16th, and he confirmed that he set that deadline. Is it a little bit of a slap in the face?
I mean, I think the Padres are just kind of boxed into a tough spot right now with all these long-term contracts. And in a way, they dug their own grave because if you're Manny Machado and you're looking at all these other contracts like the Bogarts one that was just handed out, he was a 7.5 WAR win player. I mean, that's what that's like a $56 million player. If we're just tacking $8 million to each win, then he is a ridiculous player. So, I mean, I have some concerns about last season for Machado, even though he's number 2 on my list. We'll get to that eventually. But the body of work, everything he's done in the league, the 152 WRC plus this season, 150 2 years ago, like these are the numbers the teams are going to look at. And if they have an opportunity to bring in a player like Machado, they're going to do it, and he's going to get absolutely paid. So I'm just not surprised, I guess. I would have turned it down too. He's in line to get absolutely paid.
Yeah. It's not shocking at all that he turns down 10 years, $255 million. Obviously, you're going to turn that down. Maybe he doesn't get 10 years at 31 years old, but the contracts that have been given out this season or this off season. I mean, like he's going to get at least $300 million, I bet, and as he should, because of the performance that he's put on. And obviously we can cover his stats later in the pod. But he's just a fantastic player. And the Padres also have Juan Soto. So is it like an either or situation? Like you said, they've already got plenty of contracts on the books. They just extend you Darvish. Crazy amount of money, crazy amount of years for how old he is. Not a crazy amount of AAV, but for how old he is and how long they're extending him. Just a lot of big contracts. So like you said, kind of backing themselves into a corner. Really curious to see how this shakes out because I don't think they're willing to go to the Mets level of spending. They're going to spend
Andrew
a lot.
Friedman would make you think otherwise. Yeah, exactly. I mean, but you're right.
Spend a lot.
I heard you talk about the Yu Darvish contract in your last episode, and it's spot on, right? And I wonder how much of I think it is Machado playing hardball. I think he wants to be in San Diego, and I think he's looking for one of those contracts that's going to be front-loaded, right? Because it's the average annual value that's going to impact things for these front offices. So if you can pay Manny up front for the 7 WAR seasons that he's putting forward, I think there could still be a contract in play where he gets what he wants. It's just going to be more upfront, and the teams get that average annual value they're looking for. So that was kind of the case with the Yu Darvish extension, right? They're going to be paying a couple of players up to like Tom Brady age who are not going to be performing like Tom Brady, a ridiculous amount of money, but not as much because they're a little bit more front loaded. So it's interesting.
Yeah. I'm curious how it all shakes out. And obviously, it's always whenever a team signs a player to a big deal, it's that short term dopamine rush. And then you're kind of like waiting to see, can the player hold up? And, okay, if the team wins a World Series, all right, then it's all worth it, but if they don't, then you're kind of like in this sticky period, especially when your other stars start to get closer and closer to free agency. Juan Soto, he's going to be commanding, top tier dollar. So is he going to want top tier dollar? Are the Padres going to convince him that he wants to be a Padre? Whatever it is. I'm also curious to see how future big contracts, especially with younger guys, I wonder how often they're going to put in opt-outs, because we've seen it bite teams already. Xander, Machado, obviously, like rightfully so, those guys should opt out. So it's like, I wonder if teams are going to look at that a little bit closer and maybe try and hold that out of deals. Obviously, we don't know how Machado is going to perform over the next 5 years, but I'd still expect that it's going to be very good performance. So I'm just curious to see if this offseason has maybe changed the way teams will think when they're giving out these huge contracts.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think for player opt-outs, if I'm a team, I'm more likely to give that to a hitter than a pitcher.
Sure.
Like like the Chris Sale situation. I'm glad Chris Sale's a Red Sox. I think he gives the team a higher ceiling than it otherwise would have, obviously. But, I mean, it was obvious he was going to opt in, right? Because the dude's coming off elbow surgery or heading towards elbow surgery. I can't remember the timeline there. Yeah. But for pitchers, obviously a lot more risky to give that player option. But you're right. Yeah, I think we're going to maybe see them more and more for those hitters.
Yeah, we'll see how the market shifts. It's always interesting. It's always shifting, too. You always think things are like, all right, we generally know how it's going to go. And then you're like, Xander Bogaerts, 11 years? Like, what? Like, oh, my gosh. Like, crazy. Which is why I love it. Off season's amazing. People are always like, what do you cover in the off season? I cover the off season, baby. It's so much fun. Oh my goodness. All right. A couple other deals. Angels signed Matt Moore. He was one of the few good relievers still out there. Lefty reliever, had a huge rebound year with the Rangers. He stays in division, goes to the Angels. Angels always looking for pitching. 74 innings pitched for Moore this past season, 27.3 K percentage. Walk percentage is the bane of his existence, 12.5. But the 198 ERA, 195, 298 FIP backs him up. How do you feel about this deal? It's only 1 year, $7.5 million deal. Do you think Matt Moore can back up a breakout year?
Yeah, I think he can. He's a fun story. Kind of feel for him. I remember being in college and he had that like 16 strikeout playoff game or whatever it is. So seeing him get a little bit of redemption here is nice, and a little bit of a payday, even if it's a 1 year contract. In terms of fantasy implications, he's like the only lefty there. So he would have to be like absolutely lights out to take the closer's role and run with it, which makes me feel a lot better because I have a lot of Carlos Estevez shares. I was a little surprised to see Moore sign this late, especially coming from the left side, and so many teams needing bullpen help. Our Red Sox definitely could have used him. So he could back it up. It's low stakes, and I'm cool with it.
Yeah, definitely. And a cheap deal, a 1 year deal for Matt Moore. I mean, it is a true breakout season. I mean, the year before, terrible, over a 6 ERA. It's so I don't think he's going to have a 195 ERA again. I think he definitely got a little bit lucky with the homers. Check out the home run per fly ball rate. It's like a 4.5%. You got to expect it to rise a little bit, especially for a guy that's had trouble with the homers in his career. He is, now newly a reliever. He was normally a starting pitcher for a long time. So maybe that's definitely helped him a little bit. But over 74 innings, I'm kind of surprised he was able to hold those homer numbers that low for that long a period of time. And I like this. I like this a lot. I kind of think the Angels kind of had a sneaky good offseason, but we'll see how the season goes. That's all that matters, right? White Sox re-sign Elvis Andrus. He is a guy that I thought was destined to go to the Red Sox. It's a 1 year, $3 million deal. coming off like a very, very good season, a season that you just wouldn't expect. 3.5 WAR for him, over 577 plate appearances. How did you feel as a Red Sox fan missing out on Elvis Andrus and going with Yu Chang instead? How'd you feel?
Yeah, I mean, not great. Obviously, I'd rather have Elvis Andrus, and it felt like such a low stakes contract that it's almost weird they didn't go and get him. If anything, I think it might speak to their confidence in Christian Arroyo. It might speak to their confidence in the health of Adalberto Mondesi, which, kind of rose-colored glasses there, right? But I'm hoping that's what it was. It feels like if he went for 1 year, $3 million, and it took him this long to sign, that he never really was a target for the Red Sox. And at this point, whether we like it or not, we kind of just got to trust the plan. And so I'm fine with them kind of sticking to their guns. For the White Sox, though, I mean, this guy was a league winner for fantasy managers last year down the stretch. He's going to turn 35 this year, but even though that's 35, it's almost like younger than you would think Elvis Andrus actually is. So, I'm sorry, younger than you think he is.
Right.
He's going to bat towards the bottom of that lineup. He's going to provide some stability for them. I think he's basically going to be their everyday second baseman. So good signing for the White Sox. Kind of a missed opportunity for the Red Sox, but again, just didn't really seem like it was a part of their plans.
Yeah, kind of interesting. I would have liked him. I like Kike. I like Kike a lot in center field with the defense he provides. Andrus would be nice. Relying on Mondesi feels like
fool's gold.
Yeah, basically fool's errand, whatever it is. I don't know. I would have liked Andrus, obviously. And maybe they do feel confident, and maybe they did try to get Andrus, and Andrus just liked the White Sox, and in his older age just felt like settling, which is possible. I don't know.
Sure.
I didn't hear any reports. It was just kind of like, oh yeah, Red Sox are probably going to get Andrus. You'd think,
or Josh Harrison, or one of those names,
Jose Iglesias, or whoever. Anybody. Or trade for somebody. Whatever it is. And Mondesi was not the name I thought they were going to go for, but whatever, man. Roll the dice, I guess.
Interesting.
So we'll see.
It's a little interesting that too, because how much that moves things around. Like you brought up Kike going to center, and we love Kike in center. That also pushes Duvall potentially to right field, and we love Duvall in right field. So like,
yep.
Like Duvall's a right fielder as opposed to Duvall as a center fielder. There's a big difference there,
right?
Now it does create a little bit of a clog with Yoshida and Verdugo and everybody else, but I don't know. It's too bad. I would have liked to see the fit and just ride it out. If it doesn't work, it's low stakes.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, unlike my toilet, give me clog in the outfield all day. Give me a clog on the field.
And in the rotation.
And in the rotation. Absolutely, man. Bro, if we're arguing like, oh my goodness, we have too many outfielders, too many pitchers. Come on, bro.
Yeah, perfect.
Have we watched baseball before? Come on. Get on the same page here. This is a good thing. Let's go.
Yeah.
So I would have liked, and if Yu Chang ends up doing well enough, or just a, solid depth option, bench option, that works. That works too.
Yeah.
Whatever. At least they have guys, All righty. Let's get into it, baby. Top 10 list. What was your thought process going into this, especially taking into account defense? I know as a fantasy guy yourself, taking in defense, how do you grade that out in terms of who to emphasis on?
Well, a tough thing, I mean, when talking about defense is that it can change so much year to year. I mean, you have your stalwarts, your Matt Chapmans, your Nolan Arenados.
Sure.
But that's something that can move around. And with looking at like just third base eligibility, I mean, there are guys that if you're looking at fantasy, they're eligible at third base, but in reality, they're actually defensively playing in different positions. I think it's not going to be, I guess the ban of the shift is not going to be more of a stress on corner infielders, right? But that could move some of these guys around throughout the year. I know Gunnar Henderson, it's not obviously because of the shift, but he's a guy who was third base last year. He's probably going to be an everyday shortstop this year. So the positions do move around. Defense didn't really come in too much of a factor for me. If there was a glaring issue, like if this wasn't the 2023 Devers and it was the 2018, 2017 Devers, then defense would have played more of a toll. But I'm not going to lie, it really wasn't much of a consideration for me.
No, fair enough. All right, let's do this thing. We're going to go through 10 through 6, and then we can give some honorable mentions afterwards, and then get into our top 5. That sounds good.
Yeah.
What do we got here for your number 10?
Yeah, so I went with veteran presence over I guess young guys. I mean, really most of the options were veterans, but I had to leave off Brian Hayes, which hurt. Because we want to talk about defense. He's a tremendous defender, very athletic. Just think he's disappointed a little bit too much. So I went with Eugenio Suarez at number 10, which. Defensively, again, not to keep bringing up defense, is definitely not his calling card. But coming off the heels of another 30-homer season, he's a veteran presence on a young team. It's not a great park to hit in, which I think is going to limit his ability to showcase his skills. He has a massive range of outcomes, so this could look dumb, right? I mean, we could be having this conversation a year from now off the heels of a 190 season with 16 homers and an injury. But like my number 9 guy, hits the ball with authority. He doesn't really chase. He just whiffs a lot, which is maybe actually not a good sign. It's kind of a sign of a pretty bad hitter. But he is reliable. He's a guy who's going to be out there every day, playing through injuries. He had like that pool injury or something a couple seasons ago. It was like, oh no, he got injured in the pool, and he still ended up playing. And I think he's not going to have. He has a terrible batting average floor, and But if you've built up on your roster, if we're talking fantasy for a second, if you've built up a safe batting average floor, I think he's a pretty good target for you. He's not going to hit for average as a player, and for some guys that's okay. That's a part of the game that we've accepted. We've exchanged average for power. We'll see if that heads in the other direction with some rule changes. But for now, Suarez at number 10.
Or with no shift, are we just going to grip it and rip it and even more? I don't know, man. I don't know. Yeah.
It doesn't matter what the defense is doing if you hit it over all of them, right? So,
I'm not salty about the defense, defensive shift getting banned. I'm not mad about that at all. No. Anyway, sorry. Number 10, Ryan McMahon for me. Top tier defense at the position. I was kind of surprised to have him on the list. I went back and forth quite a bit with 2 other guys, Hayes being one of them. He's got the power, 20 homers. StatCast page is looking nice. He hits the ball very well, and very good defense. 9 outs above average, which is 96th percentile. 3.1 WAR, only 95 runs created plus. So it's definitely the defense that's carrying him here. I definitely believe in the power going forward, and then also the walk percentage is very nice at 10.1. It doesn't strike out too much, which kind of makes me feel a little bit positive going forwards that maybe he can keep the average looking well enough that he will still be starting, especially with how good the defense is. I like Ryan McMahon. I don't love him. And like I said, I'm kind of surprised he's on my list. I was not really expecting to have him on my list, but he snuck in. You could argue a bunch of other names and why they should be higher, why they should be lower. He kind of hit the middle ground for good enough hitter and very good defensively that I went with Ryan McMahon there.
Yeah, I like the McMahon pick. I don't see anything wrong with that. And I mean, I think it kind of speaks, the fact that we're surprised by it, I think speaks to the depth of the position within Major League Baseball today. So, yeah.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. All right. What do you got? Number 9.
So, number 9, going with a player who I view very similarly to Eugenio Suarez, and that's Matt Chapman.
Okay.
Yeah. The defense actually took a couple steps back.
Sure.
Maybe not necessarily the platinum defender lately that we credit him with being, but he's still very good. His problem is actually very similar to Suarez. He whiffs a lot, right? He doesn't chase, but he swings and misses. And he hits a lot of fly balls and pop-ups. He gets jammed a lot. But he's just a little BABIP, batting average and balls in play away from like potentially having a monster season. I mean, we're talking about like potentially premier defense, lots of power, and a great lineup. Who, if he just gets a little luck in BABIP, we saw it happen before. He has one outlier season where he hit over 270, and it was because his BABIP was really high. He just got a little bit lucky, and that's within his potential range of outcomes. His chase rate, like I said, is really good, but that strikeout rate of over 27%, it's going to constantly limit his upside. And when it comes to being a baseball player, like that really limits how high he can go on this list, because if you're striking out that much, you're not getting on base as much as you should. It's not that great, but 92.2% average exit velocity was 93rd percentile. He had a 13% barrel rate last year. And like those figures, as awesome as they sound, they're actually kind of in line with his career. He's just some BABIP luck away from a monster season, and even with that said, I think he's got a safer floor than Suarez. He's a few years younger. I like the lineup context a little bit better. So Chapman 9, Suarez 10, but I wouldn't fight anybody on reversing those two.
Interesting. My mind is working overtime to see who you've got higher than both these dudes. I think my number 9 is one of them. It's so interesting. All right, so we'll talk. We might talk about them a little bit later. We'll find out. Number 9 for me is Yandy Diaz with the Rays. Walk percentage is fantastic, 14%, beating out the K percentage, 10.8. He doesn't, and that is the peak of where he's at. He's also a very good average hitter, 296, 401 on base, and the slugging is 423, 146 runs created plus. Very nice. He is dreadful defensively. He is 5th percentile in outs above average, -8, which definitely pulled him down on my list. He's a tough player to gauge because it's like, all right, he's the type of guy that you look at and you go, oh, okay, yeah, he must hit some bombs, man. He's got 9 home runs, man. He doesn't hit for very much power, which is fine. If average and on base is your thing, go for it, bro. He's a very good hitter, very good player. 366 WOBA as well. X-WOBA backs him up there. 3.8 WAR on the season. He's a very good player. The defense drags him down. I think the lack of power a little bit drags him down as well. He's the type of guy that feels like if he could have a little launch angle luck, then
saying this for a decade, yeah,
we could see this. We could see a fantastic season. I feel like he's gonna have like his freaking Chase Headley season. He's gonna have that one year where he hits 30 bombs and the on base is fantastic. It's gonna be crazy. I can't wait. I can't wait for when that year definitely happens. But like you said, I mean, we've been saying it for a long time, but that's why he sunk a little bit to my number 9. The power and the defense drags him down a little bit. Yeah, what do you think?
No, that makes total sense. I mean, hey, he got a contract essentially. Get paid by the Rays. He must be pretty good.
True.
I mean, look, despite all the ground balls and he hits a lot of them, it was still a 146 WRC plus. I mean, that is pretty awesome. That would rank higher than some pretty prominent names. Austin Riley, Rafael Devers, Jose Ramirez, to name a few, who are 3 of my top 4 on this list. So just in terms of an offensive presence, he is very good. He is maybe one of those guys where defense, like you said, should come into play. Obviously kind of dreadful at the position, but he's not going to spend all of his time there. So it's almost like baseball's kind of becoming almost like the NBA, where it's never going to completely be that way, obviously, but where positions are kind of becoming this like nebulous, it's hard to pin down because one day a guy's playing third, the next day he's DHing, the next day he's playing first base, then he's in left field, then he goes and plays third base for the next week. The Rays love to do things like that. Diaz, I'm sure, will spend some time DHing this year and potentially moving around depending on where they need him. Sure,
definitely. What are we looking at for your number 8?
Yeah, so I think you said, you're racking your brain trying to figure out who I have above Matt Chapman. I think part of it is because I was ranking shortstops in this, at least 2 of them, guys who are going to play shortstop this year, but were third baseman last year. So this one might be a little bit bold. I got Gunnar Henderson. Yeah, I mean, for fantasy, he's definitely there, right? For real life baseball, it's definitely a stretch, especially to call him a third baseman, because he is, as of right now, going to be the everyday shortstop for the Orioles. My first concern for him, just in terms of performance, necessarily wouldn't even be the seeing Major League pitching a second time, which is like a massive concern, right? It would be the ballpark, but with him being a lefty, that ridiculous left field wall in Baltimore that has just like taken the careers of like Ryan Mountcastle, is not a concern for him. With that said, I mean, he might be a better pure hitter than Bobby Witt Jr., the other like shortstop / third baseman that I'm going to rank on this list. He's got a good glove. He's not going to steal a ton of bases. He could be between 15 and 20, which kind of makes him stick out at the position. It's not a position we necessarily correlate with stealing a lot of bases. In terms of upside, I think Gunnar is almost unmatched on this list, other than maybe, if we're just talking potential range of outcomes, like what they could do when you sprinkle in the speed and the athleticism, there's not a lot to compare with him, maybe outside of Ramirez. So I'm in on Gunnar. I think for a third base ranking, maybe I cheated a little bit by including him. I'm just trying to make the position seem better than it is. But yeah, Gunnar number 8.
Over Matt Chapman and Eugenio Suarez. I mean, he hasn't played yet, bro. He hasn't even played yet.
I mean, in a vacuum, if you could say to Seattle, hey, would you trade your Eugenio Suarez for Gunnar Henderson for the 2023, even if it was just for the 2023 season, like right now, I think they'd take it. I think they'd do that trade. So Chapman, I think, maybe a little bit of a different discussion. He's more in his prime than where Suarez might be leaving it. And obviously there's some defensive implications, but yeah, that's where I'm at with Gunnar.
Okay, fair enough. Speaking of Eugenio Suarez, he is my number 8. The power hitting machine. I mean, you covered him very well. 31 homers, 11.6 walk percentage. Very nice, and kind of evens out the K percentage a little bit. He's a tough player to gauge because, I mean, the K percentage has gone up over the past 2 years. Getting over 30% is never what you want to see, and it puts a lot of emphasis on the BABIP luck to just make sure that his batting average is 236. It's just making sure that it's just good enough that the power can play. So if I'm projecting, I might not have him 8th, but for what he's done and the floor that he's given you, 4.1 WAR, this isn't even like a peak season for him. This is just getting back to what he's done before. And he's average defensively. He's always been average defensively. There's nothing to love or knock really there.
Except when Cincinnati put him at shortstop.
What? What? And that's another thing is that everybody was, as soon as he got moved over to Seattle, everybody's like, oh, well, there goes Suarez. He's moving from Great American Small Park to freaking Seattle. The power's going to dip a little bit, and that's all he really had, and it didn't. I mean, he had a great season, 131 runs created plus, still a very good year. And I wanted to give him credit for what he's done. I think it ups the floor a little bit, especially for a guy that's high strikeout numbers. The fact that he was able to prove that he's been able to do this just gave me more confidence to really put him at number 8 on my list, which is why he's over Gunnar Henderson for me personally. I wouldn't trade him. No, I'm just kidding. I probably would. I don't know. I'm in the middle between projecting and then also, seeing what the floor is for making these lists. I've been making them for a couple of years now, and trying to gauge where a player is going to be is just so hard. We've had so many prospects just not perform the way you're expecting them to, which definitely gives me some pause when it comes to guys like that. That's all I'll say.
No, yeah, that's something I was actually just talking about with my co-host on Keeper Cut, Chad Young, who writes for Fangraphs, writes our pitcher list, is really since that 2020 season when minor leaguers lost their season, prospects they've busted. It feels like it. Maybe this is just from a fantasy perspective, but it feels like prospects have busted at a much higher rate than they did before. And I think we're finally starting to see that not necessarily be the case anymore, because a lot of these guys that are coming in didn't really miss a season in 2020, right? They either weren't in the league, or it was high A and they were just coming off of fall league or whatever it might be.
Right.
And I think guys like Gunnar, guys like Corbin Carroll might start to fit that mold, whereas those rookies before who did miss seasons, we saw that kind of hurt them. So my hopes for Gunnar Henderson are pretty high. And I think the other thing too is we're going to start seeing rookies a little bit earlier, because teams want to get a look at them so that they can get their feet wet in preparation to run for that Rookie of the Year title the following year. I think we saw that with those two players, right? Gunnar Henderson and Corbin Carroll. So Gunnar isn't coming in with no experience. If he was just a prospect, like Jordan Walker's not going to be on my list here, right? If he was just a prospect guy with literally no experience, sure, I'm out. I'm not going to put him above a guy like Suarez. But we saw him put up a 125 WRC plus. It was only a month, but it's enough for me to say more than Suarez.
Fair enough. I'm just going to breeze through my number 7, Matt Chapman. Like you said, the defense took a dip this year. I'm fairly confident that he's going to be able to return to at least a very good level there, which is kind of the reason why I have him over Suarez. Also, I just think the slightly lower K percentage ups his floor just a little bit than Suarez, which just kind of they're both tough because I mean the average is very low. Suarez got a little bit luckier with the BABIP, like you said. Chapman's a good BABIP away from having a fantastic year because the power is extremely good. Walk percentage very good, 11% there. 4.1 WAR, 117 runs created plus. All lower than Suarez technically, like not as good of a hitter this past season, but I definitely believe in his defense going forward, and that he can return to being very good. The tough part with defensive statistics, is how shaky they are. Especially compared to offensive statistics. So a little tough to gauge there. I'm kind of betting on the skill for Chapman there. And the power is still very good. He's still playing a very decent amount. So that's why I got him slightly above Suarez. I was debating back and forth. I could easily see them switched, whatever it is. What do you got, number 7?
Yeah, no, they're both very similar players there, Suarez and at least from a far away perspective. So I went with I'll get my other guy who's not really a third baseman, but played third base out of the way, and that's Bobby Witt Jr. If it was a fantasy list, he would be a little bit higher. I'm not as high on him as most fantasy managers. Look, he went 20 and 30, right? You can't take that away from him. Can't be ignored. Unless he's more selective at the plate, though, I have some concerns there. 52% swing rate, 34.7% chase rate. And he swung a ton in the zone as well. So he's just up there hacking away, which means he never walks. I mean, he's like his teammate there, Sal Perez, were less than 5% walk rate, which is just not going to really cut it on this list. It's tough to be higher because it is a position that does produce some guys who have really high on base percentages. His batting average will be low, and he's not going to hit for a ton of power. In the lineup around him, even though it's not a fair way to evaluate, like he's less of a third baseman because his teammates think, that obviously doesn't make sense. But when we evaluate players like retrospectively, we're going to look at the numbers, and his just aren't going to look as nice because the team around him and Kauffman Stadium are just, it's not great. It's not great. So I'd love to have him on my fantasy rosters. I wish he was on the Red Sox, but I'm not necessarily as bullish on him, especially for this position, as maybe some other people would be.
So you think he's going to have a better year than Matt Chapman this year?
As a third baseman, no, because I don't think he will have a year as a third baseman.
Okay.
But yeah, I think at the end of the year, if we look at their complete body of work, I would feel confident saying Witt Jr. is going to have a better season than Chapman.
Interesting.
If Chapman was a platinum fielder as recently as last year, then I'd say yes.
Sure.
And you're right, it's not as sticky year to year. But I could see Witt Jr. making strides there, and Chapman just kind of being the same guy he's been. I think Witt Jr. is going to have a lot more plate appearances to help him look a lot better than Chapman. The underlying data won't suggest it, right? Chapman's a Statcast darling, but he just whiffs too much, and that's going to continue to be a problem for him.
Okay. And do you think? I don't know. How do you think Witt's defense is going to be this coming season? You said strides. How good do you think he's going to be?
Well, switching positions first of all, but it's a team it's been consistently producing some pretty quality fielding infielders. I'm not in the know enough to really dive into that and tell you why that is the case. Fangraphs does give him a 45 present value on his fielding with 55 future. So it's kind of like an average player, but with it, not being so sticky year to year, I could see him having all of a sudden a great, tremendous season. He's in contention for a Gold Glove. If Derek Jeter can win Gold Gloves, Bobby Witt Jr. can at shortstop as well.
Well, that might speak to more Gold Glove value, but anyways,
good point too. Yeah.
I don't want to sound like a Red Sox fan here, but come on, bro, we're judging on Gold Gloves.
100%.
Gosh. All right. Number 6 here. See, what's so tough? Let's go through our honorable mentions now, because from here on out, it's going to be constant comparison and bringing up other players and, ruin it, because it's like, I don't know if I could talk about my number 6 without talking about my number 5. Like it's going to be so back and forth here. So any honorable mentions that we haven't mentioned yet that you want to get out there, guys that just missed the list?
The biggest one for me by far is Brian Hayes, because he's just such an athletic stud fielding at third base. I think he's limited because of the lineup around. And look, he had a terrible season, right? He's disappointed 2 years in a row. He broke out in 2020, and it was like, oh, we have something here. He was drawing comparisons to Francisco Lindor just at third base instead of shortstop, which is a lofty comparison. But even then, like, I think you could make a compelling case. The names that we've given here, Suarez, Chapman, maybe not Chapman, but Suarez, McMahon, certainly Gunnar Henderson and his limited body of work. If somebody wanted to take a Brian Hayes over any of them, I wouldn't fight them on that if we're just purely talking a baseball third baseman.
Yeah, fair enough. Hayes is definitely up there. Hits the ball so hard, man. Hits it so hard. The power doesn't really show that, but you take a look at the Savant page, it's fantastic. He's also got the speed, 20 stolen bases. I could easily see him being a 30 steal guy. I'm excited to see what he can do going forward. Exciting future for the Pirates, which thank goodness, at least
until they trade it away.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Until they outage it, until they get too expensive. Brandon Drury was another one that I was looking at. We'll see how much third base he plays this coming season. But 28 homers, 123 runs created plus. Hard to ignore. He's average defensively as well, so I could easily see him. He's definitely one I debated for my number 10 spot over McMahon. Decided to go with the defense for McMahon. And then it was also, tough to compare with Hayes as well. Like, I don't know how good of the season he's going to have, and this is definitely a breakout for Drury, but also the Savant page looks nice enough, especially, barrels per plate appearance, definitely career high for him. So it's curious to see what he could do, but he was definitely another just miss for me.
Yeah, he was a guy that was getting buried because it was, he's only hitting because he's in Cincinnati, and then he really struggled in San Diego, but he hit the ball hard, he lifted it, and he pulled it. And like, that's what you want, right? And he's flexible. So I don't mind that honorable mention pick at all.
Yep. All right. Top 6, baby. This is where it gets really interesting. This was tough, man. This was very tough. And I can't wait to hear what you got here. Number 6. What are we looking at?
So number 6, I don't think it's going to be surprising. I think we might end up with the same one here. I got Alex Bregman. Is that who you had at 6? No. Nope. Okay. I hope it's not Devers. Oh my goodness. Bregman I view as almost very similarly to Arenado in terms of like fine exit velocities, nothing jumping off the page, few ground balls. I'm sure we'll talk about the Nolan Arenado in a minute, but it's kind of like the new the post Coors, post 30 years old Nolan Arenado, who's still awesome, but kind of it definitely profiles as a different hitter. So back to Bregman, though, and how he compares. The exit velocities, few ground balls, lots of balls in the air. He's got a high pull percentage, very few strikeouts. And I'd actually give Bregman the edge maybe when considering OBP over Nolan Arenado. It's just, Nolan Arenado is performing like an MVP. Bregman's been a little bit hot and cold over the last few seasons. And I think that 41 homer, 2017 or something that we saw from Bregman, that was obviously an outlier. Probably a result of the balls, but also him just being an extreme pull hitter and taking advantage of that stadium down there in Houston. So I view these two very similarly. They're my number 6 and number 5. I know St. Louis fans will hate me for having Arenado at number 5, but I put a heavy emphasis on offense, and the 1 through 4, I just don't see how I could have them in any other. I can't make a case myself having Arenado over the 1 through 4 when considering offense. So Bregman number 6.
Damn.
You got Arenado number 1, don't you? Based on that look.
Oh my gosh. What? All right. Oh, this is great, man. This is great. I can't wait. My number 6. Oof. My number 6 is Austin Riley with the Atlanta Braves.
Wow. Okay. That's fine.
It's the defense. It's the defense.
Yeah.
That's it. It's a negative 6 outs above average. He's 5th. He's consistently showed that he's poor defensively. He's a fantastic hitter. Finally showed it again this season. 2 years in a row. Fantastic power. Just a fantastic hitter all around. Hitting 273, 349, 528. Good for a 142 runs created plus. He's an extremely good hitter. 5.5 WAR as well. He's very good. The strikeout percentage also keeps him a little bit held back, in my opinion. But the fact that he was able to show this again, hitting wise, just really confirms just how good he is. He also plays a lot, 693 plate appearances. Maybe I have him a little too low, and maybe I'm pulling the defense down a little bit, but at the hot corner, and that was the other thing that I didn't want to be too biased or anything. I'm a Sox fan, so I don't want to put, Devers too high. And comparing Austin Riley to Devers, I kept going back and forth. And I was like, there was a moment where I was like, oh, out of principle, as a Red Sox fan, I should be putting Austin Riley above Devers to like try and not show my bias, because it's always in the back of my mind. But in comparing them, I'd rather have Devers than Riley. I would rather have the defense that he showed, even though it's below average, -2 outs above average for Devers. It's better than Riley. And if Devers showed the terrible defense that he's had before, I would probably give it to Riley, but especially with the power numbers there for Riley. But Riley's been worse. They've spotlighted him at first base a couple times, which kind of is the team feels like kind of admitting, yeah, he's terrible. He's terrible at the position. So that's why I've got Riley at number 6. And obviously I've got Devers at number 5. He's a fantastic player. I love Devers with all my heart. Him lowering the K percentage was also huge for me. He's also done it longer than Riley has, so I just feel a little bit more confident in it going forward. And they're both fantastic players. I could easily see people going Riley, but either way, we'll see. What do you think? What do you got at number 5? I love how different our lists are. This is fantastic.
I think with my list, we're seeing really the fantasy player in me come out a little bit more.
I love it.
Which I think, again, it's the stickiness of fielding. Although when you talk about these players, Nolan Arenado is just a rock star third baseman, and I wouldn't fight anybody on that. To talk about, I guess, Riley, who's number 4. So I have Arenado 5, Riley 4, Devers 3rd. So that's my rundown of those 3 players.
Gotcha.
I like Riley. The strikeout rate has improved each season. So even though it's still a flaw for him, he's improving it. He really struggles against breaking and off-speed pitches, and I think that limits his batting average upside. So Devers definitely gets a huge advantage there, and they walk at a similar clip. So I don't think OBP is going to be all that different. Like we might look back 10 years from now and say that Austin Riley had his career season last year, and that's okay because it was a hell of a career season. But it maybe doesn't mean he's actually as good as it would suggest. But even with the flaws at third base fielding the position, he was still a 5.5 win player. I mean, he was really out of this world. So I'm okay putting him above Arenado, but I view him and Devers so similarly that, like you said, the difference in strikeout rate and particularly performance against breaking and off-speed pitches just makes Devers a more complete hitter to me. I think it's more likely that Devers could meet the power of Austin Riley than it is that Austin Riley could just magically improve against both breaking and off-speed pitches and perform as an overall hitter like Rafael Devers. So last year's overall stats wouldn't suggest that, but I think going forward, that would be more my expectation.
So what puts any of these players over in Arenado?
Yeah, I'm trying to look at it as like this moment going forward, not Nolan Arenado coming off a 6-7 win.
Gotcha.
Like, but you
don't want to give him credit for that. Like, I don't know. That's where my brain comes in, and obviously you got your own way of analyzing it, which I respect.
Yeah, look, there's nothing to criticize with what he did. It's just he's a different player now. So I think if we're looking at this as like prime Colorado Nolan Arenado, and we're like, oh, he's just back, he's performing at that level. Not exactly. He's had to make a lot of changes to his approach. And that those changes make me believe that he can continue to perform at a high level. Like he can adapt. He's just an overall great hitter. But fewer ground balls. He's elevating a lot more. He's pulling the ball a lot more. And that resulted somehow in like a BABIP that matches the BABIP he was posted when he was in Colorado. So he's a career 292 BABIP guy. He had a 290 BABIP in 2022. I have a hard time believing that's going to stay the case. He's not particularly quick. And obviously, if you're hitting the ball in the air, you're not really going to maintain that high of a BABIP unless it's mostly line drives. But with him, it's been a lot of fly balls. So I think he's probably closer to more like a 260 with around 30 homers, because even though he is lifting and pulling, he's not hitting with a ton of exit velocity.
Sure.
But he is providing you 160 games and elite defense at third. So I think trying to balance that with the offensive production is difficult, because when you look at the offensive production of the 4 players I have in front of them, we're talking about like MVP candidates just based on their bat. So I had a hard time with that. Arenado, I think you could put 2 through 5. I really have no issue with where you put him.
So you're leaning on the batted ball data mainly.
Yeah, mainly because there's nothing to really complain about with strikeouts.
Right.
He's not a particularly high walk rate guy, but he's been a fine on base player.
Yeah, I think the tough part for me, it's I got into Savant maybe a year ago, 2 years ago, so it's not even like I've been, in it for that long, but it's just hard for me to project using the batted ball data. I think it's very valuable when you're seeing it happen, and especially keeping strikeouts in mind and things like that. But a guy like Arenado, he's I would have said the same thing last year. Like he's getting a little bit older, and if I was projecting, I would not have thought he would have a 7.3 WAR. Like I just wouldn't expected it, which is why maybe I'm leaning so much more on where the player was this past season, and maybe I'm betting a little bit too much on it, but that's why Arenado's higher for me. Number 4 for me is Alex Bregman. Once again, the floor there. He's a fantastic defensively as well, top tier at the position. The walk percentage higher than the K percentage. Gotta love it. Gosh, and the power's still good enough. 23 bombs. It's nothing, nothing amazing, but nothing to scoff at. He's still dangerous when he needs to be. He definitely uses Minute very much to his advantage. 136 runs created plus as well. Still, it's just a fantastic hitter, and the floor there. If the BABIP ups 20 points, he's approaching a 400 on base. Like he's a fantastic player, and just the floor that he provides there, and amazing defensively. The defense is really what gets him over Devers and Riley for me, while also being comparable hitting wise. He's definitely slightly worse than both of those guys, but limiting the strikeouts as well just really ups the floor, and you gotta love it.
He's a champion. He's competed for MVP awards. I mean, he has a pretty complete resume, was a top prospect. There's nothing fluky about the production. He's dealt with a fair share of injuries too, which I think might be hurting his overall outlook or the way people perceive him, I guess. I view him very similarly to Nolan Arenado. Like if we're just taking out the historical Hall of Fame, consistent Gold Glover status of Nolan Arenado and just looking at them of what they are right now, I think they're actually very similar players. But I don't think they have the same offensive upside of the names I have above them. So at number 4, I had Austin Riley, who you said, and which when you factor in defense, obviously he's several tiers below Arenado and Bregman. But he has shown a lot of improvements. The strikeout rate's still north of 24%, which, like we talked about, so I can't possibly put him above Devers. But when you compare him to Bregman, I think, especially in a league that seems to be all of a sudden becoming a little bit starved for offense, and every pitcher is throwing 99 miles an hour, and starters are going less deep into games. Like it's just harder to hit the ball. So I'm putting more of an emphasis on offense, and I think Riley is a few tiers above Bregman when it comes to batted ball quality for sure. And I could see him not reaching the on-base ability of Bregman, but still being really, he had an awesome OBP north of 360 last year. So Riley at 4 for me.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. At number 3, I got Jose Ramirez.
Whoa. Wow.
Yeah.
Oh man. I got to hear this.
Yeah, I know. Well, comparing him to my number 1 and number 2, he's not as good. Comparing the seasons he had with those two dudes, he's not as good. I can understand if you're projecting for this coming season, if the batted ball data pushes Jose higher than that. Also, the speed is very nice, 20 stolen bases as well, which is definitely higher. And the speed potential has always been higher than the two guys above him. The defense isn't as good, and the hitting's not as good. That's where I'm at. Yeah, I mean, he's a fantastic player. Like that's the tough part is it really is splitting hairs here at the top. But for how amazing the two top guys are for defense for me, and also hitting wise, 139 runs created plus is very nice for Jose. It's just not. It's not quite. It's just not there. It's just not there. 6.2 WAR, also fantastic. Not as good this past season. I think he's fantastic. I think they all have very similar floors, and you could argue on age or bad ball data, whatever it is. But for what they've done, I'm putting Jose at number 3.
Fair enough. I mean, so all cards on the table at this point. I've got Jose Ramirez at number 1.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I was thinking, doing the math here. Yeah. So why is he above Manny Machado?
Sure. So Manny Machado, let's talk about him. So he's my number 2, right? 30 years old, age doesn't factor in. Ramirez is just as old. For his career, Machado never had a K rate higher than 19.4, but he set a career worse this season at 20.7, and that was actually reinforced by a 23% strikeout rate in the second half, which is not devastatingly bad, but for Manny Machado, that's pretty bad. He wasn't swinging more in the zone, but his chase rate was a career high 30.7. And these are concerning signs for a guy who's all of a sudden, maybe leaving his prime and getting into his, I guess, later prime years. It was his most aggressive season at the plate, 50.8% swing rate. His zone contact rate was also a career low by a noticeable margin. And look at if you're pulling up his StatCast page, look at his performance against fastballs for his career. And that one of the first places I look to see, is a guy slowing down. And again, I hate that I'm even bringing this up so much. He's just 30 years old. He's not an old, I'm 31. So it's not a big deal here. But
well, in your opinion, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not a big deal.
If we're looking at first base, sorry, not first base, fastball. We're looking at performance against fastballs.
We can look at first base if you want. I don't know, man.
Oh God, no, it's
whatever helps.
Not as nice at the top. We're at the top at third base, which is a fun place to be. He wasn't quite as great. His whiff rate against fastballs this year is 20.5%. Look at his whiff rate, his career against fastballs. It's really not even close to that figure. So I'm not trying to make mountains out of molehills, but if we're looking for signs that Manny Machado, all right, he was really amazing in 2021. He was really, really good in 2022, but took a little bit of a steps back. Well, why was that? And they are things that could suggest maybe he's slowing down just a little bit, right? It happens to everybody, all baseball players at this point. And when we're splitting hairs, like you said, that's enough for me to go Ramirez over Machado, especially when you look at Ramirez. And I mean, we can dive into him in a minute, but I have more reason for optimism going into next year than I do with Machado.
Fair enough. Yeah. And the jump in strikeout percentage is definitely concerning. 5% jump, that's definitely something you got to take note of. Like you said, 20% is not bad.
Still good. Yeah,
it's still good. And especially with how much he makes contact, it's still good. It's definitely a higher BABIP than he's normally running with. I feel like he averages right around a 300, and it was a 300 BABIP and a 337 this past year. He's just a fantastic hitter, man. And I hear where you're coming from, and you're bringing up some good points. I mean, there's definitely signs of a slight regression from the superstar he's been, but he was a superstar this past year, and I gotta give him credit for it, which is why he is my number 2. And Nolan Arenado is my number 1. They're just both fantastic seasons. Over 150 runs created plus for both of them. Over 7 WAR for both of them. 95th percentile in outs above average for Manny Machado. 99th for Arenado, which is the main differentiator here, especially the K percentage as well. Arenado, 11.6 K percentage. Just fantastic players, both of them. It's 1A, 1B for me. Arenado gets above there because of the platinum glove that he's always had. Machado's always been good, but he's never been as good as Arenado, and that's kind of what gets him over there for me. For right now, those are my top 2 third basemen. I think going forward, if we see the regression that you feel might be coming, I'm definitely gonna adjust my list accordingly, most likely, because I think it'll show in the K percentage, the stats. The average will probably slip for a couple of these guys. But for right now, those are my top two dudes.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking. I think the phrase you used is really accurate. We're talking splitting hairs here. I do want to give Ramirez a little bit of love. He's my number one third
absolutely.
baseman. He's not the glove, like you said, that Machado and Arenado are, but a few people are. He's also, like Machado, he's on the wrong side of 30 now. I think he's shown a little bit less signs that he's aging, though. He had an average exit velocity dip from a career high 90 miles an hour in 2021 to his lowest since his rookie season at 87.7 miles an hour. He does elevate and pull a ton. He rarely strikes out, so it's not as big of a deal. Like he's a guy who really doesn't need to have crazy exit velocities to put forward awesome offensive seasons, because it's just not a critical part of his game. However, I think a lot of it, the exit velocity anyway, in the dip in production was a result of the torn UCL in his thumb. So he had surgery to take care of it. He wanted to stay in the field, though, so he played through it. Before that injury, so he sat out June 18th. So I presume he got injured on June 17th. But before he got injured, 262 plate appearances, 16 home runs. His average exit velocity was 88.1, and he had a ridiculous 336 ISO. So it's only 262 plate appearances, but it's not like it's Jose Ramirez. It's like, that adds up. Yeah. After that, for the rest of that season, 423 plate appearances, 13 homers. So less homers in over 400 plate appearances than he had in 262 plate appearances before that thumb injury. The average exit velocity went down almost a full mile an hour, and the ISO went from 336 to 173. So he's had surgery to address this. He's not the guy he was before the injury, because nobody is other than Barry Bonds. But is he closer to that than he was post-injury? I think so. And, you brought up the WARs from 2022, but if we just extend that 1 year, Ramirez is the only third baseman to have a WAR over 6 the last 2 seasons. So to me, he's very much still in the picture as number one. It's splitting hairs. For fantasy, he's a clear-cut number one because of the speed component. That matters way less in real baseball. So that's not too much part of the conversation for me, but still feel comfortable enough putting him number one.
Fair enough. Absolutely. Very fair. Top tier players. Another thing that happens when you do these lists every year is you start analyzing the most recent year a lot more, or maybe just putting more emphasis on it. And I think that's what I've been doing and kind of how my lists kind of differ. So I definitely see that with Jose. I mean, he's just fantastic, man. He's just a fantastic player all around. So consistent, the power, the speed, and like you just so analytically pointed out, the difference before and after injury, that matters. It matters, and it's kind of like one of those storylines in the season that you kind of can look over. I love sabermetrics. I love stats, but sometimes they don't tell the full story, and there's always a little injury, and or it's aging, or the bat's slowing down, or whatever it is. Little things like that could point out. So very fair having him number one. You can definitely see it. Definitely see it. Absolutely.
But it is fun using numbers to push a narrative, right? Because they're the same. They're the same age, but with Machado, I'm like, I think he's aging. With Ramirez, like, oh no, he was only injured. So it's totally just.
But it's not just that. And like you said, I mean, the huge jump in K percentage, the whiff percentage on the fastballs, it's definitely something you got to look at and you got to pay attention to. When I start seeing it, and if it definitely sticks around in 2023, then, like I said, I'm going to have to adjust my rankings. But for right now, that's what I got. That's what I got.
And you're right. Like, it's also not something that it's something that, like you said, I think that's a very good point, right? You got to see it continue for it to be determined if it's actually a thing or not.
Sure.
We saw this with Paul Goldschmidt. People thought Goldie was washed because he just couldn't catch up to fastballs. It just wasn't happening. And then he puts forward an MVP season. So, a couple of almost MVP and then an MVP season. We might see the same thing with JD Martinez. He was brutal against fastballs, but could he all of a sudden with the Dodgers start hitting them better? Maybe. So it's not like Machado was even terrible against them to begin with. But that was fun. That was fun.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I was definitely on the Arenado should have been MVP train. And maybe that's wrong. Maybe that's right. Who knows? Maybe I'm putting too much emphasis on the defense there, but I don't know, man. He's freaking amazing. I couldn't deny it either way. Goldschmidt was also amazing. So whatever, that's neither here nor there. Pete, thanks so much for doing this, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, this was awesome.
Where can people find you, and why should people listen to Keeper Cut?
So you can find me at Pete B Baseball on Twitter. I am a private Twitter account, so you'll have to send a request, but I have no reason not to welcome you on in if you want to see angry Red Sox and Celtics tweets. Keeper Cut is on the Pitcher List Podcast Network. That's Chad Young and I. He's a tremendous brain, and I'm there. So that's kind of our deal. We focus on keeper leagues, which maybe explains my Connor Henderson and Bobby Witt Jr. love. And we focus in on Otnu leagues, which are an awesome form of fantasy baseball. You get a $400 budget. There's inflation. There's arbitration. It's a really intensive format created by Niv Shah over there at Fangraphs and Chad, actually. So if you're interested in that kind of long-term fantasy planning, give Keeper Cut a listen.
Hell yeah. It might be, Chad Young and then you're just there, but I mean, Chad hasn't been on this podcast yet, so That's true. And you are. So I'm not saying it's a diss or anything. I'm not trying to come at anybody, but
you've got to have him on and tell him that you have Jose Ramirez as your third or fourth best third baseman and see how he reacts. He is a big Guardians fan. Yes, I'm here for the reactions. I'm here for the clicks. So that's it.
I'm not really trying to analyze. I'm just here to just bait people the entire time.
That would work. That would work with him.
All right, sweet. All right, perfect. I just start off the pod, by the way.
Jose Ramirez sucks. Yeah.
Dude, we're talking about right fielders. Why are you bringing up Jose Ramirez right now? No, I just thought it was interesting. What? Thanks for doing this, Pete. I appreciate it, guys. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure to leave a 5-star review in Apple Podcasts. Tell me what you like about the show. I greatly appreciate it. 5 stars in Spotify as well. And we'll post it every single Tuesday. We'll see you back next week for episode 186, covering the top 10 left fielders. Have a good one.